I'll start again. How's the sound in the back? They're shaking their heads.
We don't have speakers. This is only going into here.
All right. Well, you may want to move forward then, because we're making the videotape and the sound is collected by the camera, so we need to be close as an audience. All right. We're going to have a very interesting session to continue the symposium. I want to welcome all of you and urge you to consider coming to each of the sessions that we're offering during this 3-day event. Libraries are very, very proud to be sponsoring this symposium to honor 125 years of women's graduation from WVU. We have 2 guests who are going to act as guest and moderator, and I'm going to introduce the moderator. In case any of you don't know who I am, I'm Carol Wilkinson, and again, I want to welcome you. Dr. Amy Kesey from the Physics Department, who is past president of the American Women of Science chapter, has agreed to be our moderator. Amy received her BS in mathematics with a minor in music from Davidson College and an MS in physics and a PhD in plasma physics from WVU. She just found out that she will be promoted to research associate professor. Congratulations.
Thank you.
In the Department of Physics and Astronomy, the first person to receive such a promotion in the Everly College. Well, even more applause. She conducts research in the, now we're going to be challenging here,
Big words.
magnetospheric
Good.
physics, studying the region of space surrounding the Earth, and is developing instrumentation for satellite-based measurements and laboratory diagnostics. She has also conducted experimental laboratory plasma physics research with an emphasis on diagnostic development. She has served as principal investigator and co-investigator on several awards sponsored by NASA and the National Science Foundation. Her service as president of the West Virginia chapter of the Association for Women in Science was 2007 through you were president for a long time. Through 2014. Holy Toledo. That was, I hope you enjoyed every moment of it. That's quite a term of office. And she's currently chair of the National AWIS Chapters Committee. She received the 2012 Mary Catherine Buswell Award, recognizing her work to support women at WVU. So that's very nice as well. Congratulations on that. Amy, can I ask you to introduce our featured speaker?
Yes. Dr. Marjorie Guerra is an associate professor in the mathematics department at WVU. She holds a PhD, MS, and BS in mathematics, and also a BA in education with a grade 7 to 12 math specialization. She has 18 years of experience in higher education and 11 years of experience working with K through 12 outreach programs. Previously, she worked for 10 years at Allerton Broaddus College, where she served for the last 2 years as the division chair for the natural sciences. For 5 years, she conducted research as a mathematician at the Institute for Scientific Research, West Virginia High Technology Consortium Foundation, where she did mathematics research on projects for agencies including NASA and Air Force research labs. There she served as the director of the Computer Sciences Group. Her research areas included verification and validation of artificial intelligence, genetic algorithms used for cooperative control of UAVs, data mining, and virtual reality. Dr. Guerra was also the principal investigator on 3 National Science Foundation awards that focus on developing educational technology and increasing the pipeline to IT careers. She has been the external and internal evaluator on 18 local, state, and national level education grants, focusing on technology integration, educational technology development, and general program evaluation. She recently received a U.S. Department of Education Fast Track SBIR 2.5-year award to develop immersive software for students who are visually impaired and blind. Through this SBIR, she and 2 partners started a company called eTouch Sciences to market and sell this software. So when I first found out about the symposium, celebrating women at WU for 125 years. And we were talking about possibilities of featured women that we should include. I said, well, we have the first woman to receive a PhD in mathematics at WU here on the faculty. So we should definitely think about including her. So I mentioned this to Carol, and she talked to Margie, and then Margie asked me to be the moderator, so that's why we're here today. So Margie, I'd like you to go ahead and sort of give your basic timeline of how you ended up being the first woman getting a PhD in math here.
Okay, I want to thank Carol for inviting me, and thank you, Amy, for agreeing to moderate. I appreciate it. And I'm very honored to be here to celebrate 125 years of women at WVU. It's great. It's quite an honor. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background because I am a West Virginian. I was born about 20 miles from here. I lived in Fairmont for much of my life. We live now in what's considered Grafton, but it's right outside of Morgantown. And I only lived outside of the state 5 of my 55 years. So I am a true West Virginian. And so I feel like I represent a lot of the students that we have at WVU. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story of how I ended up in college, really, because I think it might be typical of some of the students we see or some of the people we know. Unlike Amy, who took Calculus 1 and Calculus 2 in high school, I had a very rocky start. Actually, after my junior year of high school, I decided to drop out of school. So as a high school dropout, I received my GED the next summer, or the summer after I dropped out. But then, by the age of 19, I was married and I had 2 children. So that, to me, is what, at my age, that was a typical in life. My parents did not go to college. My parents grew up in Morgantown, went to Morgantown High. My father never graduated because he went into the Army and served in the Second World War. He finished his junior year and was shipped out that next summer, or that same summer. My mother stayed behind. She did finish high school. They got married when he came back on leave, but neither ever went to college. And although my older brother did go to college before me, I was never really encouraged to go to college. They encouraged me to do well in high school. They were kind of upset when I dropped out, but nobody really tried to stop me. Both my sisters married very young, one at 16, one at 17. So you can see it's a typical story. So it's very surprising that I ended up on the track to a PhD. So to get into college, what happened that was really the catalyst? Well, what happened was I couldn't find a good job. So I needed to help support the family. I needed to pitch in. My husband works a blue-collar job and still does. Well, he just retired from a blue-collar job that supported the mining industry. But his earnings didn't make the ends meet. So I went to work as a waitress. And that was hard work, and I worked shifts, nights, weekends. And I really wanted something better for myself and my family. So I decided to start interviewing for better jobs. Well, I found out I had no marketable skills other than, waiting on tables. So I decided, well, maybe I should go back to college, or maybe I should try college. So I decided to go to community college for a 2-year accounting degree. And so I started night classes, and it was in one of those night classes that a professor really changed my life. And I go back to him, I'll go tear up here, but I go back to him often and say, "You did this to me," or "Thank you so much," depending on which day it is. But he really did. He found me in a night class. It was called EDP, Electronic Data Processing, the computer science classes of the day. And he said, "You're doing really well. Did well on the test, on the assignment." He said, what is your major? And I said, well, I'm a 2-year accounting. I just want to get a job. That's all I want to do. Get out, get a job. And he said, well, you could probably do a 4-year degree. he said, what do you really want to do with your life? And I said, well, I always really wanted to teach. I said, my brother's a teacher and was a principal. I really wanted to teach. And he said, well, you could be a teacher. And so he said, what would you like to teach? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, how about math? Would you like to teach math? I said, well, I'm pretty good at math. He said, yeah, I could tell from your tests and things, you could probably be a math teacher. And so that one experience and that one teacher really turned my life around. And his name is Ted LaRue, and he's still a teacher at WVU. His father, James LaRue, was some of you might know him. He was a professor at Fairmont State for many years. He was my calculus. And to close the loop, his daughter, Ted's daughter, Renee, is now a PhD student in the math department.
Oh, that's great.
So he's had a big impact on the math world around here. But that's what really changed me. And from there, I kept going to night classes, and he mentored me. He mentored me through my undergraduate. He mentored me even through graduate school. He brought me up and introduced me to the chair of the math department, Mike Mays at the time, and really helped me get a teaching assistantship there. So I really think being in that one night class changed my life. So that's how I got into it. I just kept going after that night, I guess.
So did anyone encourage you to go from the undergraduate level to the graduate level, or was that more sort of on your own choice? Like what sort of influenced you to make that step too?
Well, I actually, as you heard, I got an undergraduate in education, but I also finished my BS in math, and so I could go on to the program here at WVU. And it was really because I could not get a job in secondary ed at the time. Now there's lots of jobs, but then it was in the 80s, there weren't any jobs. There was a lot of math teachers in there, and the ones who were in there were not ready to retire yet. So because I couldn't get a job, I decided to come to grad school. It's just happenstance. And I got to teach here because they gave me a teaching assistantship. So that I got to do what I love to do, and I just went on from there.
All right, so I don't think you've mentioned what year was it that you got your PhD?
I got my PhD in 1995. So for most of us, that wasn't very long ago. And that was the first woman to get a PhD in the math department. And I was actually, there was a math department, there was a PhD program early on, which I don't know if they graduated any. If they did, it was only a few. And then the PhD program was stopped. And then they had just reinstituted it in the 80s. And so I was actually the third person to get through the PhD program and the first female to get through the PhD program. And I should have mentioned my advisor, why I decided to continue in the PhD after the master's. I had met another person who was influential, another male who was influential in my life, C.Q. Zhang, who's still on the faculty here. He actually was just a new faculty, and he saw some promise in me, and he encouraged me in a master's class to continue, and he became my advisor. So I had males along the way who were really my mentors, thank goodness. There weren't a lot of females.
Were there any female role models for you outside of the department?
Well, in my undergraduate at Fairmont State, there were a lot of female professors in the math department, and Dr. Jeannie Harris was one of my mentors there, and she was a great role model, PhD in topology, and just a great scholar. When I came to WVU, there were no females in the math department at all, and tenure track lines. Now, Betty Miller was there. She was an instructor for many years, and she was really a role model for me. I loved Betty. She was the coordinator of courses I taught, but she was never on the tenure track faculty. So, I think it was because she did not have a PhD, but there were males on the tenure track faculty that did not have PhDs. So she had gone through engineering, and then I think a master's in engineering. Is that what you had told me?
I thought her master's was in mathematics.
In mathematics, okay, yeah, okay. So I knew she had a master's, and she was quite capable, and I never understood why she wasn't on the tenure track faculty at the time. you want me to tell a little bit of history about the math department? So some of you may know Henry Gould. So we were writing a paper recently about the sponsorship program that the Advance has and how it's really helped the females in our department. And so I went back to Henry and I asked him to give me the history of the women in the math department at WVU. And so he told me that back in the 20s, there were 2 women, they held tenure track positions in the math department. And then in the years after these 2 women, there was one additional woman who started, actually, he told me she was the wife of one of the other faculty members, and she started as the department secretary and then was put on tenure track faculty. That's what he told me. And then there were numerous instructors over the years that were females. Many of them had gone through the teaching program and were high school teachers who came back to teach as adjuncts or instructors at the university. And then, fast forward to the 50s, that was it until, in the 50s, the women's role in the department was of service personnel. In 1960, there was another woman hired in a tenure track position, but she quickly left the department. So it wasn't until really the 90s that another faculty member was hired in a tenure track, another female faculty member was hired in a tenure track position. And that was Laura Pozdrowski, who is still on faculty. Many of you know Laura, she's been here many years. So it was actually in probably about 1998. She was an adjunct first, and when she got her EDD, they hired her in a tenure track line. She worked with secondary and elementary ed teachers. In 2005, Laura was tenured and promoted. So we believe that Henry couldn't really tell me about the tenured status of these women, but these women in the 20s were probably tenured because they were here long enough to be tenured. So, but it was 2011, Laura became the first full professor in the math, female full professor in the math department. So that was in 2011. It says in the early 2000s, there were 2 faculty members hired in the tenure track line. One left before she received tenure, and one left right after she received tenure. I knew those people. Now, currently, fast forward to 2016, and I think largely thanks to Mary Ellen Mazie, who was here and decided to hire some females. Mary Ellen Mazie hired me. She hired Vicki Seeley and Nicole Infante, Jessica Deschler. She hired us, well, Vicki and Jessica especially, as a cluster hire. She hired 2 females at once. And I think what she realized is that if we could get a critical mass of females, that we could support one another and that we would be retained. If not, it would be the same story repeated over and over again. One female comes, one female leaves. And so I think she had some wisdom to do this. And so now there are 6 females on the faculty in the math department, which is 22%. So it's amazing. Out of 25 lines, there are 6.
That's pretty similar to physics. We have 5 out of 25 on the tenure line right now.
Okay, so
Yeah,
so that's good. 20%. Okay, good.
yeah. And that does not include me because I'm not the tenure line person. So I add one, and then there's a teaching professor that's also a woman. So it's good that we're making it.
That we're making inroads,
Yes.
right?
So were there any other female graduate students that came up right after you that were colleagues, or did it take a while before it sort of caught on?
Well, yes, there were females in the department as students when I was there. They were somewhat accepted. If you were a good student, you were accepted. Many of the professors really encouraged me. I was a good student, so they did. But if they saw you as being weaker, I think it really hurt. I remember one class, and I was thinking about, this last night. There was one class, and I had a female colleague that was in that class, and she was just looking at her nails, just something anyone might do. But the male professor, who I highly respected and thought he was great, really called her out and said, why are you looking at your nails? And just made a big deal out of it in front of everyone. And so that really took me aback. I didn't think he would have done that to a male. I don't, and there was a lot of other treatment in the department at the time. Although there were females there, we were somewhat accepted, but we were kind of strangers in a strange land. And there were some professors that were outright harassing to us, and there was a lot of behavior at that time that wouldn't fly today, and so you just had to kind of ignore it. At the time, at one point in time, because of this type of behavior in the department, I was even called into the dean's office and asked to be on the record about some of the behavior, and I declined, saying, not that I didn't want to stand up for women's rights, but saying I have no power, and this person has power, and this person can actually block me, and I'm so close to getting a PhD, I don't want to take the chance. And so until I finished that, I would not go on the record with any kind of, statements against anyone. And so I'm happy to report today that person is not there, although many of my professors are still there. And the climate is quite different in the department now. And I don't see any of that behavior towards our graduate students, our female graduate students. I'm really thankful for that. And they do have some people they can talk to about it if something like that happens. And we do have, offices of diversity and places like that we can go to get help now. So,
Are there any other obstacles that you faced beyond sort of these ones that you just described?
well, as you heard, my main obstacle was I was not very well prepared going into college. So I had Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, so that was one obstacle. I had 2 children, so I was a mother and a wife at that, and so that was, as you know, you have 3 children, that's kind of an obstacle to studying and things like that. But I was so determined that I was going to overcome those barriers and obstacles that I did more than I needed to. I wanted to get straight A's, and I did. I graduated from Fairmont with like a 3.96. I was an overachiever. I couldn't stop. I had to be better than all the people around me, better than the males in my class. It was just something I had to prove. I felt like I had to prove. Same way when I got to grad school. My master's, I got straight A's, but in the doctoral program, I got 1 B. I remember that. Mike Mays gave me a B, or I got a B from Mike Mays. But so that was, but I had to be an overachiever. I had to prove that I had gotten beyond that high school dropout. I had to prove that, even though I was a female in a male-dominated world and system, that I could be as good as them. And it was really, it was telling where my male colleagues, they didn't care. They could get a C or a D. It didn't really bother them. They were so nonchalant about it. That would have devastated me. I would have just, so, and they were well respected, even though their grades weren't, nearly as good as mine. And not bragging or anything, but that's just, it was a drive to be, to prove myself. And I still kind of have that. I'm trying to back off from that because it's really detrimental to your health, trying but, that's actually a barrier probably.
Yeah. I think that's a challenge for many women and other people in underrepresented groups is they really have the weight of their entire group on their shoulders and they have to prove themselves in order to prove everyone.
Do you still feel that way in physics?
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's better than it used to be with, a stronger population, but it can still be some pressure. So you've had several different jobs, and so you've gotten to see the climate in different places. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the different places you've been and how it's been there?
Well, my first job, even while I was, besides waitressing, and things like that, was that I went to a small college. I was still in my PhD program. I was almost finished, but there was an opening at Alderson Broaddus College, so I interviewed, and I was very pleased to get it. I enjoyed my 10 years there, small school, and my division chair was an African-American woman, and Tommy Red, if some of you in biology, she was a microbiologist, and she really was my mentor for many years, and she passed away. And it was really sad for the community, the biology community, and for the college. But at Alderson Broaddus, women did excel. They were put in high positions. And when I was division chair, I think out of like the 5 division chairs, maybe 3 or 4 were women at the time. So we were actually more than men on the staff. So in that climate, and even at Fairmont State at the time, I didn't see such a dichotomy where I didn't see that the men were promoted over the women. But so after Alderson Broaddus, really when both my children had graduated college, it was my midlife crisis. I decided that I wanted to try something else and try to see if I could actually use math instead of just teach it. So I went to work as what was then called the Institute for Scientific Research, ISR, which later became the High Tech Foundation, part of the High Tech Foundation. But then I really met with some, I was talking to Linda Blake a little bit ago. She was talking about the NASA environment and all the engineers. And it was very male-dominated. There were males in that world really outnumbered the females. And there was a lot of, because a lot of the engineers, and especially older ones, they didn't have a lot of females around. And so they kind of like, you were different on the team. And sometimes you weren't taken very seriously. And sometimes you were, it was sort of like you had to assert yourself. And so I didn't really have that in me at the time, but now I do. And my mom always used to say, you need to stand up for yourself. You need to not let people walk all over you. Well, I must have learned it very well, because my last boss at the foundation said, you're really aggressive, So I must have learned, very well to stand up for myself. But just some examples, I'll give some examples from that. My first boss was a mathematician, and he openly said, I am very biased against women. I will tell you that right at the beginning. But I really liked him because he was the only male I came across who was honest about it. And he said, I know I am, but I'm trying to be better, and if you see this in me, you tell me about it. So I thought that was a great thing for him to be honest about it, say, I know I have some unconscious biases. I just grew up, he was older and I grew up like that, but he had a very strong wife, and she would let him know about things, and he had a daughter coming up, and he didn't want to continue that bias. And so even though he would say things from time to time, we could call him on it. So I really appreciated that. I had another boss who is my good friend now, and he'd probably die if he heard me talking about him, but he's my good friend. He even became my business partner, but he wasn't so conscious of his biases. So I was promoted to director there. There were 2 other male directors, and we went in. It was time for our raises, and I got like half the raise that my male counterparts got. And I just questioned that. I said, well, I've been working very hard. We won awards. I don't, why do you think that they deserve more than me? And he said, well, so-and-so is the sole breadwinner of his home, and his wife doesn't work, so, I'm just trying to give him a little bit more. And I said, well, that's not really fair. I think it should be based on merit. And he did the same. And like I said, I love this guy. He's a wonderful guy, but he didn't realize what he was saying. That didn't bother him to say something like that. That was kind of a, So he was giving raises to the people in my group, and I had 1 female and the rest male engineers. She happened to have a master's in psychology. So she did not get a raise at all, and the males in my group all got like a 3%, the standard raise. And I said, well, why did this person not get a raise? Why did she not get a raise? He said, well, her degree is in something that, they wouldn't be highly paid. She probably is overpaid already. So but I fought for her too, and I said, she has worked harder probably than the males in my group. She worked directly with me she was my project manager on 3 projects, and I said, she's working at this high level, as a project manager, so I think she deserves a raise. And so I think I did win that case. I said, you can take it from me. You can take my smaller raise and give it to her if you want, but give her a raise because she deserves it. So those kind of biases, everybody's appalled. You'd see your faces like, who would say such a thing, But that is what you face, and people don't realize that there's anything wrong with that. That's why I said, when my one boss said, I'm biased and I know it, that was refreshing. That was refreshing to say, I know I have some problems, but I'm working on it.